Hey guys, how's it going and welcome to this video. In this video, I want to talk to you about whether it's possible to become a software engineer without formal training. Alright, so I have some points over here and I'm going to read them and expound on them. Okay, so is it possible to be a software engineer without formal qualifications? And the answer is a definite yes. You can be a software engineer without formal qualifications if you try very hard and you work really hard. And there are ways that you can achieve that. And I just want to use myself as an example. I don't have any formal qualifications in computer science. I don't have a CS degree. And I have been a software engineer for 5 years now, and I'm currently working as one in Grab Taxi, which is in Singapore. So it's a super app company that by the time you watch this video would probably be listed on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. Alright, so it's definitely possible, and I know of people whom had degrees in different disciplines and they end up being software engineers as well. Though I would say that there is a slight disadvantage, because if you're in a formal, if you studied computer science formally, you would have built up a lot of very good fundamentals that would otherwise be lacking if you are learning this on your own via either certain boot camps or just picking it up on your own on YouTube. Alright, so I want to share with you something over here. So before we talk about how, I think I want to bring you back to the why and the what. So why do you want to be a software engineer? Is it because it's trending right now, because it pays well? Is it because you think that we are living in a post-COVID world and businesses are digitalizing rapidly, and the software engineering career has a lot of vitality and or rather longevity? Okay, that's what I meant. Alright, before I proceed further, let me just share that I'm having a very nice Pokka Oolong tea over here, and I am in a public park. So as you can see, it's really nice and chilly right here. Okay, so let's focus on the why. Why do you want to do this? Is it because it's trendy and it pays well? I mean, that could be the reason, and it's not a bad one. But if that is your only reason to become a software engineer, then it's very likely that you'll be very disappointed, because coding is not easy. It's not extremely hard either, but you do need the why to support the how. Otherwise, it's very likely that you're going to give up midway. Okay, so in that sense, software engineering has that barrier of entry, and I wouldn't say that barrier of entry is technical, but rather psychological. Alright, let's see what is the next one. Okay, it is, now we covered the why, now let's cover the what. So what do you want to be a software engineer for? So as you know, you can be a software engineer that writes code for building web applications. You can also be building for mobile application, which is what I do. I'm an iOS developer. Or you can be building applications for hardware. So a washing machine requires certain programming to get those settings to work, right? So you can be an embedded software engineer as well. So what do you want to be? So again, is it because a certain discipline, a certain field is cool, that's why you should go for it? And the answer is that you should never ever do that. So what I would recommend is to expose yourself as wide as possible. So now we talk about width versus depth. So if you're starting out, I would highly recommend that you experience as much as possible. And when I say experience, what I mean is that you go out there and you start building small little apps that has to do with maybe web development, or maybe you might like to work with some kind of backend. Okay, I think you should probably start with web first, okay? And then maybe you can buy some kind of hardware and build some robotics to experience what it's like building for hardware. Alright, so until you figured out the what, and you will know what the what is when you've tried long enough, and you realize that okay, there are two things that you can discover. Number one, you can discover that you don't like any of that. You think that that doesn't excite you, it's boring, and you just want to give up. Okay, if that is what you feel after trying out and experiencing the different areas of development, then this is a confirmation that you shouldn't be a software engineer, because it is the excitement of building something and that something can be useful that really keeps a software engineer going in times where he gets rejected time and time again by the compiler. Alright, so as I said again, at the start, it's never a challenge with technicalities. Those can be learned. It's psychological. Alright, so if you're someone who feels really hurt if a girl rejects you, then you'll be feeling much worse when the compiler rejects you 90% of the time. Alright, so the compiler will find a way to reject beginners 90% of the time. And it is the why and the what that will really keep you going. Okay, so now let's talk about the how. And the how isn't as hard as most people think. Alright, so if you don't have a formal education, how do you equip yourself to become a software engineer? What are the avenues that you can consider? So you need to remember, when you are joining a company, obviously you get paid. But what are you paid to do? You are paid to solve a problem, right? So you have to demonstrate that you have the expertise, and not just demonstrate, but really be able to solve the problems that the company has. That's why they're paying you for a reason, right? So what are some of the ways you can get started if you are really new and you want to explore this field of software engineering? So the first thing that I would highly recommend is, don't spend money on expensive courses at the start, especially if you do not know what you want. Maybe you know why, but you do not know what you want. I would suggest that you go on to YouTube or sites like Udemy and just buy a couple of courses, which are really cheap. I think it costs like a pint of beer. So do a few courses on different areas of development. For example, a full stack web development, where you learn how to build web applications with maybe JavaScript, or you can do mobile development, iOS or Android, or you can do some kind of embedded engineering, whereby you deal with hardware. So I would highly recommend that first get super exposed. Right at this point in time, you don't want to go deep. You want to go as wide as possible and find out what sticks with you. What do you feel passionate about? So let me just share, when I first started, I did web development. So I was doing Ruby on Rails, Node.js, and then after that I did a course on iOS development, and I instantly fell in love with iOS, and I decided that iOS is where I want to pursue in. So once you're able to discover what you want to do by trying many things, only then will you have the conviction to go deep, okay, which is that. So again, at the start, don't spend a bunch of money on things that don't matter. Spread yourself wide, expose yourself to as many different areas of development as possible. I mean, in fact, you can even do a small little course or YouTube tutorial on even UX design, or some kind of data science, or even even game development. That could be some areas to consider as well. All right, and figure out what sticks with you. Okay, let's go to the next point. Okay, so how do you equip yourself with the skills? Okay, so for starters, I recommend that you start building projects. But first, before you can do that, you have to understand the language. So in the programming world, a code is just blocks of information that you piece together to build something that's useful. Alright, so it's called a programming language for a reason. So just like English, you have your alphabets, and an alphabet by itself is not very meaningful. right? But when you put a bunch of alphabets together to form a word carries a certain meaning. But again, you can't use a word to convey a very complex message, right? So you have to string those words into sentences for it to have some kind of meaning. But a sentence can only go so far, right? I mean, you're not going to buy a novel just because it has one sentence in it, all right? So you have to string a bunch of sentences together in a given context to create something that's useful. So in the same way, when you want to learn to build some kind of application, you start by learning the programming language itself. You learn about the grammar and the vocabulary and the rules of the language. All right, so once that is done, I would highly encourage you to start to build projects. So you might say, what kind of project should I build? It's very simple. I would highly recommend that you build really simple projects like a to-do list, a task list, or a weather app if you are up for making some network requests. Or you can look at what's available online for free at the start. Okay, just go to YouTube and says iOS tutorial projects, and you see what's available, and then you code along. So at the start, once you get your IDE ready, once you have a certain level of competency with the language, start by copying whatever that the instructor is typing. Okay, so find tutorials where the instructor is building a project from scratch. I think it's very important to be able to build something from scratch. So start by copying exactly whatever he's typing on the screen. And while you are copying, do not just copy blindly. Okay, as you copy, try to understand why is the instructor doing certain things. Okay, so there will come to a point where you might be copying and you don't really understand what you're copying, and you try to understand but you just can't. That's fine. Okay, don't sweat over it. Take notes of that area of code which you are unfamiliar with. Okay, and don't let that inhibit you from completing the project. So once you're done with the project, okay, with some uncertainties, at least now you're more motivated because you have built something that's useful, hopefully, to find out those parts that you're unfamiliar with. All right, so you can go to Stack Overflow, or very simply go to a Facebook group and go to some development Facebook group and just post your questions on the wall or the channel, and I'm pretty sure most developers will jump in to show how smart they are by answering your questions. All right. Okay, so it's a lot for myself. It's a lot of doing that, building projects, not understanding, typing the code anyway, try to understand, leave comments to the instructor for him to expound further if necessary. Okay, and then the last part is that once you have built enough projects, okay, let's say, I don't know, 5 to 6 projects that you can be somewhat proud of, then go for interviews, go for job interviews. And how you should approach job interviews would be, since you are an absolute beginner, you should try to read the job description of the companies that you're interviewing for, and you'll find that 70 to 80% of the requirements are quite similar. All right. So what you want to do is that you want to ensure that the projects that you're building illustrates those skill sets. All right. So for example, one of the requirements would be, you are able to work with a JSON API. You're able to work with a RESTful API. Okay, for example. So ensure that the projects that you're building, the side projects, do have these features for you. Number one, for you to get familiarized with this technology, and secondly, for you to show to your interviewer that you have done things that demonstrates this technology. Okay, so let me see if I have a final point for you. Yep, so read the job description, make sure you build things that demonstrate your ability in fulfilling the job description, and go for the interview. And I wanna just share something. When I first started out, I failed like I think my first 3 interviews, and I was really sad. I remember there's one time where I was told to make an API call and and build a list, and I wasn't able to do that because I wasn't familiar with the syntax of making an API call. I kind of know how to do that if I had some code to reference, but again, I can't do that without reference. And I think whatever the result that you get from your job interview, and especially if you fail them, don't be sad, all right? Instead, be happy. Why? Because you get to know what are the areas that you are not so good at. And you can approach this in 2 ways. You can think, oh, I suck at this, I should probably quit. Or you could say, hey, this is something that I was tested on. I wasn't able to demonstrate that, and it looks like this is important. Let me go and become proficient in that by doing more projects that illustrate these principles. And as you practice, over time things will click, and the only way to become proficient is to keep doing the same thing many times.